Hi, Aaron Ukulele Loki here, and this is your neighbor speaking, just after Halloween. With the clock ticking down on the midterm election, I've got a bit of candor about the candidates as I see it, and today's video applies to our neighbors across the nation, along with a heartfelt plea about why it is crucial that you vote for change by November 6th. The short version is you are important, your community and your people need you. Last week I responded to neighbors who were asking for my thoughts on the 2018 Colorado ballot, so I shared a video explaining why I'm voting yes on Amendment A, Amendment 73, and Proposition 112, as well as why I'm voting no on Amendment 74. And after today's message, I'll get back to posting another Colorado-specific video with a bit more about the purposes behind the propositions and a focus on Denver's RTD race. Now, let's start with my candidate recommendations nationwide. So grab your ballot. It's super important to carefully weigh every candidate, their past promises, their voting records, their policies, their character. There's a lot to look at if we're to be informed, right? Yes, and that's exactly what we should do, ideally, diligently, every day of the year, and doubly so on days leading up to the primaries. But guess what, neighbors? That ship has sailed. The primaries are over, and at this point it's time to look past the micro nuances of this or that candidate and align ourselves with the larger view of party and platform. In other words, the draft is over. We're not picking players, we're rolling out our team. It's time to get control of the ball and run our plays. And at this point in history, if you care to put the brakes on the appalling, bizarre, runaway train that is the Trump presidency, then any Democrat running against any Republican is on our team. I mean, we wouldn't go to the Super Bowl between the Broncos and the Seahawks and root for the Raiders, right? I don't know, it's a sports analogy. It's not really my thing, but I tried. Personally, I skip the Super Bowl, especially since the NFL can see past domestic abuse and sexual assault, but it seeks to silence Kaepernick's heroic protest. But what I won't skip is an election, especially not this crucial midterm election, and it is the most crucial election of our lifetime. If you were appalled by Trump's cruelty, his mental and emotional unfitness, his dangerously off-the-rails decisions, his pathological lying, his megalomania, his corrupt administration, and the Republican Party currently in power who props him up, there's really only two questions to ask when deciding which candidate to vote for. One, is there a letter D for Democrat next to that candidate's name? And two, is that candidate running against a Republican? If so, that Democrat is your candidate. Yes, I'm simplifying it. Vote for the Democrat. That's it. That's our required move if we hope to put checks and balances back in Washington right now, period. Now, before you groan and whine about partisanship or warn me against blind allegiance to the Democratic Party, let me tell you this. It's not a blind move. I have my beef with plenty of Democrats. This is a strategic and informed decision based on voting records, platforms, historical data, promises made, and most of all, it's an understanding of the legal system of checks and balances. Okay, now that system can work, but we have to organize. Because when it comes to these midterm elections, there are two factors that make our united Democratic votes not only sensible, but essential. Those factors are math and reality. First, the math. It's a numbers game in Congress, and the party with the majority takes all. As for our math as voters, here it is. Those of us who oppose the devastating agenda of the radical right wing and the monstrosity of Trump, all of us, we're in the majority. We are now, and we were during the 2016 election. So how did a minority of right-wing Republicans win? Those who drank that Kool-Aid poisoned with racist, anti-women, anti-LGBTQ, anti-poor, anti-democracy, anti-environment, anti-sensible gun control, pro-billionaire. How did they win? If they're the minority? Well, it's fairly simple. They vote together in a block, and they vote for the Republican. Always. It doesn't matter who the candidate is. Lots of them hated Trump, and they still do, but they unite to grab power. Add to that their years of sneaky gerrymandering where they've rigged voting districts to amplify their voters' power, and since 2012 they've launched a massive campaign to suppress and disenfranchise voters nationwide, the likes of which hasn't been seen since the days of Jim Crow. Look at all this working against us, and it becomes all the more glaringly important that the rest of us have to stand strong together. Yes, we have a variety of ideas and opinions. We have our smaller differences on so many things, but at the core, we are all way more similar to each other than we are to these Republicans. So, If we split ourselves between two candidates, or if we opt out of voting on an imperfect candidate, if we let the perfect be the enemy of the good, then we lose to the worst Republican every time. And when they win, they continue to shape policy that devastates our communities, our friends, and our neighbors. So while I'm a lifelong proponent of fighting for the world that ought to be, I also know that we have to prepare and participate in the world that is. And that's the reality part. The reality is that we are all staring down a ballot at a two-party system. Your complaints about that system, however justified they may be, will not change a thing for the better on November 6th without your Democratic vote. Someone asked me the other day, are you saying the only reason we should vote Democrat is to stop Trump and these new fascist Republicans? No, I'm not saying that at all. Stopping Trump and these Republicans is not the only reason, but it is the urgent reason. He's bad. He's really, really hugely bad. The most bad. So take the fact that the Republican platform is hastily dismembering our society and attacking everyone and everything we hold dear, and put a pin in that. But then let's also add to the equation the fact that the Democratic platform is currently written as the most progressive major party platform the U.S. has ever seen. You can read it on their website. You might actually be surprised at how eloquently it has finally incorporated many of our progressive values. Next, look at the tireless work countless activists and concerned citizens have been engaged in for the past 2 years to shape up the Democratic Party and shoehorn in as many truly progressive candidates onto ballots across the country as possible. You can start to see a hopeful picture developing, but none of it moves forward unless the Democrats gain a majority in Congress. Maybe you had a beef with this or that Democrat individually, but as a group, we need even those Democrats to make up the numbers in the House and hopefully in the Senate. So if you see a D on your ballot, bubble it in. What's that? Oh yes, I'm sure someone right now is just asking me incredulously, every Democrat? Really? Yes. Really? Did I stutter? I'll repeat it. Neighbors. I'll repeat it even more succinctly. If you're not down with a country that serves only guns, Bibles, and billionaires, you better help stop the Republican Party. The first move is a non-negotiable. Elect Democrats. This is the week. Yes, there's lots more to do after that, but with no checks or balance in Congress this November, all of us are in trouble. And history will marvel for 100 years saying, how did they let that happen? I've studied history and I've scrutinized these past 2 years every day. It's not an exaggeration to say that the Republicans are launching a Holocaust. If you're still resisting the unfortunate reality of this either-or situation between the Republicans and Democrats, read the platforms of each party. Then think of Congress like a teeter-totter, right? Or a scale of justice, with each side pointing to one of these two platforms. Whichever side hits down with a majority gets to advance what is written in their platform. Those are the laws that are made. In this instance, it matters less who sits on either side as much as it matters which side has more weight on it. It's a numbers game. Knowing this, if you give me a lifeless brick for a candidate, a brick, as long as that brick is painted blue, I'll vote for it over a sentient Republican, because when the scale tips direction, we know the outcome. If you're confused because Obama wasn't as progressive as you wanted him to be, look deeper at which side the congressional teeter-totter was pointing. You'll see that for 6 of his 8 years in office, the Republicans had that thing nailed to their side in Congress. We can do that to Trump this November 6th. We have to. Or to use another analogy, if the party that has the most fingers pointing at it advances, then I'll vote for a dismembered arm, a mannequin, as long as it's painted blue, before I'd vote for any sentient living Republican. Do you get it? A plaster arm for Congress would be better to protect our interests and loved ones more than a Republican, especially with their hostile platform. No, this is not mindless partisanship. It's actually very mindful strategy. Remember, most legislation that is passed or blocked in the U.S. comes down to party line. You can predict it with more accuracy than the weather. And every structural racism denying, climate change denying, white supremacist applauding, homophobic, misogynistic, pro-gun, pro-tax breaks for billionaires Republican who opposes our worldview knows about the power of unity, and they vote it. But on the left, we're different because we value diversity of opinions. We care deeply about arguing for justice and nuance. We care about change, growth, and ethics. Well, if we want to change what the platform says, or hell, if we even want to rewrite how elections count votes so we can someday do away with this two-party system, that's great. Maybe we can do that, but not on election day. That work happens during primary elections. It happens during our activism work, and we build coalitions with direct actions. And it only happens when the Republicans who would devour us are not in power making all the rules. So, voting united is the bare minimum requirement. Right now, that means voting Democrat. Even if you don't love everything about this or that Democratic candidate, remember, voting is a chess move, not a love letter. And this doesn't just apply to your votes for Congress. The laws your state houses pass follow the same trend, so vote for Democrats to beat Republicans in your state legislatures. Finally, there's another important thing to consider about party when you're voting for governor. This one is very chilling. As we've seen, Republican control is attempting to ethnically cleanse the U.S. They're disenfranchising voters of color. They're separating children from their parents and caging them. They're deporting non-white immigrants, both undocumented as well as those who are here with legal documentation. They're erasing protections for LGBTQ people, with a particularly virulent attack on trans people. They're allowing for increased levels of pollution leading to poisonous water and air. They're honoring and enabling sexual predators. They're insulting our allies abroad while cozying up to foreign enemies, tyrannical murderers, and tyrants. They're scoffing at the rule of law and the norms of our democracy. They're robbing our budget of tax revenue from billionaires, and now they're coming for our Social Security and Medicaid. But what if the Republicans could bypass Congress altogether and change the Constitution to further their agenda of hatred and profit? This next bit of information makes your choice of state governor more than just a local issue. It has national implications because a change in the number of Republican governors in the U.S. could give a staggering power to Trump and Pence. Why else do you think gubernatorial candidate Kemp in Georgia has been working so hard to erase tens of thousands of black voters' names from the roster? Here's one reason. Did you know it only takes 34 Republican governors in the U.S. to call a constitutional Congress? That means they could functionally call to change the very Constitution of the U.S. Can you imagine the likes of Trump and Pence, Ryan and McConnell amending the Constitution? Picture them passing Christianity as a required religion, banning same-sex marriage, passing amendments making it unconstitutional to regulate polluting corporations, banning abortion, and access to birth control, stripping citizenship from children born on our soil, and mandating their deportation. This list goes on and on. You know their agenda. So if you have beef with this or that nuance of this or that Democrat, put it in perspective. The Republicans are working on a total restructuring of our nation based on their twisted values. This is unthinkable, but it's real. So when I say yes, we must put aside our smaller differences and unite to vote Democrat, that is what is at stake. In Colorado, I already like much of what Democratic governor candidate Jared Polis has to say, so it's an easy decision. I'm also very opposed to Republican candidate Walker Stapleton's run for governor. And no, it's not just because Walker Stapleton is the great-grandson of a Denver mayor who was a notorious Klansman. It's not even entirely because Stapleton refuses to disavow his great-grandfather or join us in our fight to strip away that shameful name from a place of honor in one of our Denver neighborhoods. I'm opposed to Walker Stapleton and voting for Jared Polis because Walker Stapleton has appeared side by side with the wildly far-right, flagrantly racist, anti-immigrant Colorado cipher Tom Tancredo. And he stands side by side with Donald Trump in espousing more of the same. But even if Stapleton were a reasonable candidate, and even if all these things, if many things were awful about Polis, I wouldn't vote for Stapleton because the balance of Republican governors must not be upset in any way that gives them the power to amend our nation's constitution. So see what's at stake? Watch your governor races closely as well, because it all matters. Finally, I want to share a plea of encouragement for any non-voters if you're still with me. I know this is a long video. I want to talk specifically to non-voters who are activists and community organizers. First, thank you for your activism. Activism and civic engagement require much more than merely voting. I recognize that many of you go way beyond the scope of those who merely vote and then do nothing more. We need you. I also agree completely with the words of Denver commentary writer and educator Hasira H. Soel Ashimu, who reminded us that voting should be an extension of your activism, not the extent of your activism. But I have to turn that thought and take it further to add something that many of you may not want to hear. Not voting should be seen as sabotage of your own activism. And in this climate, I'll take it one further. Not voting Democrat on a current ballot that has a close race with a Republican is a sabotage of any and all progressive activism. I know we can all go on for days about disappointment with, or even outrage over this or that particular Democrat. We can and should acknowledge and fight the rising oligarchism. We should work to push back the farce that allows our two-party system to prostrate itself to unchecked funding from corporations who were awarded the rights of people by the Supreme Court of the Citizens United ruling. But in the hostile power grab that is this Republican Holocaust, not voting to block the Republican agenda by voting for their opposition party of Democrats allows Republicans to legally undermine every progressive impulse. In this scenario, all of our activism becomes an issue of filling a leaky bucket without first plugging the hole. Or if I can create one last analogy to support my thinking, voting Democrat is like brushing your teeth to ward off the plaque that is Republican majority legislation. Sure, there are many other options for dental hygiene and even dental adornment. You can and you should also floss. Why not rinse with anti-cavity mouthwash and use teeth whitening strips? You can even get braces or go further by adding a sparkly tooth diamond. But if you don't brush those teeth, you're going to lose those teeth. Then all other options and improvements are a moot point. The Republican platform is hostile to everything you and I believe in. The Republican platform seeks to destroy and erase any protection of the people we care about. The Republican agenda seeks to legalize and legitimize the destruction of the very values we hold central. The Republican agenda is also what led to the Citizens United ruling, and the Republican agenda is also working to add more justices to our courts who will uphold similar decisions. While this or that Democrat may be problematic or may even be hostile to some of our values, the Democratic platform is workable. For instance, the Democratic platform has officially denounced the Citizens United ruling. Let me be clear, I'm not arguing that we vote for the lesser of two evils. I disbelieve that argument because I believe the philosophies of the two current parties are fundamentally different as enshrined in their platforms. The Democrats may be arguing over the best ways to combat racism and anti-Semitism, and we may wring our hands at the stupidity of some misdirected efforts. But the Republicans are denying that racism even exists, and the Republicans are winking at white supremacist shooters who are armed and walking toward churches. That's a big difference. The Democrats may be arguing about what best ways to battle climate change, and some may be leaning infuriatingly too far toward oil and gas interests when making concessions. But the Republicans are denying climate change exists while they appoint oil and gas executives to dismantle the very regulatory boards that were meant to oversee them. That's also a big difference. These differences go on and on. So while our activism can and should be aimed at electing truly deeply courageous progressives and using all of our tactics of petitions, boycotts, disruption, protest, grassroots mobilization, on and on, to steer those candidates, we must not fail to unite behind even a Democrat candidate whenever that failure would allow the Republicans to continue hoarding power. If we fail to do that, these Republicans will erase, disenfranchise, deport, and criminalize the very lives of some of us and our neighbors. Anyway, that's my thinking. I understand the urge to be disgusted, and I thank you for putting into perspective the depth of the wounds that lead to self-disenfranchisement. But a disgusted populace who disengages is the end goal of these Republicans. They want you to just hate the system and walk away. If voting didn't matter, the Republicans wouldn't be so hell-bent on disenfranchising voters with suppression. Let's not give them what they want. Vote them out. Then we can stop playing defense and put our activist energy into progressing toward our goalposts. Please check your registrations and vote Democrat by November 6th. That's the bare minimum. Then we've got lots of work to continue. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. I'm Aaron, and this is Your Neighbor Speaking. Feel free to like and share. You can also like or subscribe to my pages on YouTube and Facebook. And, of course, your thoughtful comments are always encouraged. Thanks. Go vote.